claims and controversial arguments whether the book is racist or not racist. First, it starts off with Marlowe being describing his journey as an upriver as traveling back to the earliest beginnings of the world and that the Africans were seen as prehistoric men. Marlowe describes this band as savages and not people and cannibalistic for eating their own human beings and tribe. He also claims them that they are fine specimens, meaning that he sees them as nothing and had been trained like a dog.
Um, well, throughout the book, Marlowe, or just like throughout the book in general, they describe the people in Africa as savages, and what was it? Mr. Kurtz had described them as like um, people who are like the lowest part of society, and it's in Achibe's um, essay, he had mentioned that what was it that in Heart of Darkness, Africa was kind of just used as uh, like not like as its country or just like of itself, but kind of used as like a stage drop or something. Just like it removed the people, like the personification of the people. It removed the culture of its people. It removed everything about it. And as he stated, Africa is not just about its haze of distortions and cheap mystifications, but quite simply, as a continent of people, not angels, but not souls either, just people often highly gifted people, and oftenly striking successful in their enterprise with life and society. So, like, Achibe is right that in the book they're treated as savages, but in reality, the people in Africa are actually just like highly gifted people. It's just they're not in Africa, they are not given the opportunity to advance. They don't have proper technology. They don't have proper like equipment to like really like catch up to Europe. And like in the book, imperialism is a main issue throughout the entire story. Like Europe is seen as like
Gods.
kind of like the main like
Powerhouse.
intelligent people, like stuff like that, and while Africa is seen as just like the lower part, when really, I mean, they've made tribes, they established tribes, and they've been successful. And like, but it's kind of sad that throughout the book, when white people, like people from Europe, like from Kurtz, Marlowe, like they stress that no, like we are the bigger people. We have established a really big part of this land. Like you are far below us. And it is also really racist too for the fact that Conrad was also like racist, like the author himself was racist, and so it kind of would influence the book that he would put his own racist views into this book, aka like Kurtz and Marlowe, like even thinking that these people are savages. Um,
Not only do they see not only do they see them as savages, but Marlowe also dehumanizes their looks just because they didn't look as westernized as the Europeans are, and also by calling them ugly and ape like monkeys as well as ugly for their skin colors and how they are their actions towards each other.
And plus, the people like in the book, like the people in Africa, they don't even have names. Like it dehumanizes and eliminates Africa as a human factor. Like
They don't represent like in the book in the heart of darkness. Since she mentioned they didn't have any names. Not only did they not have any names, but they also didn't have that much line or like a paragraph like in the book, and it's barely they barely they barely have anything to do with Africa, and instead it's all about dehumanizing them.
yeah. And another point is that Conrad had also like praised like white people or just European people in general. Um, like he had a fascination with them, but when he was describing people from Africa, he mostly like like took note of their color. So a lot of times he had a fixation on blackness and would give them like had a brief description. A black figure stood up, showed on long black legs, waving long black arms, compared to like when it was a person from Europe, it was just like his calves exposed to the public gaze, dazzled on the beholder of the splendor, etc., etc. He basically praised like European people, and like that kind of just shows that he himself was racist. Like he himself was racist and put like his racist views in this book, aka how he viewed like the African people as savages.
Since he views them as savages, he also calls them like kind of like dogs. One of the quotes were, "Cruelties of the most outstanding characters are practiced by the natives, such as burying the slaves alive in the grave of a dead chief." So like all of the African Americans who he calls or claims savages were the ones who were doing all the dirty work and not the Europeans. And all in all, like the Europeans created this mess. Like they dominated Africans and African tribes, and that's how the civilization of the African tribes like dehumanizes and lowered even more.
Yeah.
Okay, so A Heart of Darkness is not racist because Conrad is trying to show how imperialism is in the way that the Europeans are trying to rule over the Africans.
So even in a letter to his publisher, William Blackwood, Conrad even said that the criminality of inefficient and pure selfishness when tackling the civilization works in Africa is a justified idea. I think what he meant by this is that Europeans, they always, not even just Europeans, but many other people, when they actually think of other people, they think, oh, they're the top dog. So he wanted to show that, and in the book, is that they were kind of in the wrong in a way.
And there's also a quote that Hawkins gave about how Achebe was talking about in his book, An Image of Africa. So in An Image of Africa, Achebe comes close to saying that A Heart of Darkness should cease being taught. After noting that it has been classed as prominent literature, read and taught, and constantly evaluated by serious academics, he asks whether a novel which depersonalizes a portion of the human race can be called a great work of art. My answer is no, it cannot. And the reason why it cannot be depersonalized as a portion that depersonalizes a human race is because it's not trying to depersonalize the African race. It's actually trying to show how the European race is using its imperialism and how they are also savages in their own way.
Another quote that I found really interesting is, "The better and higher specimen of our race would therefore increase and spread, the lower and brutal would give away and sincerely die out, and that rapid advancement of mental organization would occur, which is raised the very lowest race of man by far, the brutes, and in conjunction with scarcity principle modification to form has developed the wonderful of German races," pretty much is also saying that, oh, as long as you are just of the Europeans, they would just do whatever it took to just get rid, or not get rid, but to civilize those, even though they might not want it.
There's this other quote as well that describes how when Conrad was pointing out to the hypocrisy in which the ideals of the civilizing mission were espoused, Conrad may have questioned the validity of those ideals themselves. It shows that the civilizing mission in and of itself is actually going backwards and showing the imperialism that the Europeans themselves are trying to enforce amongst the African American race. There's another one as well. So right here, it also shows how Conrad is also saying how Conrad also used the trope of evolution in Heart of Darkness to attack imperialism by suggesting that Europeans and colonies could slide backwards on the evolutionary scale. Kurtz is the main example. So in Africa, the wilderness is whispering to Kurtz things about himself that he did not know. So in and of itself, he is starting to hear the call back to the wildness that he had. And the continuation, it says, and he passes beyond the bounds of permitted aspirations, indulging his greed and lust, placing the heads of rebels on posts around his house, presiding at midnight dances, ending with unspeakable rites, probably human sacrifices, and committing the hubris of setting himself up as a god. So this isn't showing any racism towards African Americans. It's just showing how the Europeans themselves can fall into greed, bloodlust, and savagery themselves.
As well as Conrad, a lot of people, they believe that Conrad viewed African America as evil and uncivilized, but it can also be proven that Conrad actually didn't think of it, because it wasn't the Africans themselves that caused, what was his name? Kurtz to actually become corrupt. It was the being taken away from Europe itself that caused them to do it. So he pretty much indirectly did it to himself, because it wasn't the African people that changed him. He changed because he wanted to, in a way.
He himself felt the forces of nature calling to him, and he fell into them by his own accord.
Yes.
It wasn't the African Americans who did it, it was he himself who fell into the grasp of savageness and savagery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Out here, Heart of Darkness offers a powerful critique of at least some manifestations of imperialism and racism, as it simultaneously presents the act critiqued in ways that can be characterized only as imperialistic and somewhat racist, but not as much.
Yes.
Imperialism? I think not. Colonization? I think not. It's more about domination. They are not imperializing Africa, but they are dominating Africa. You know why? Because they're not just dominating the country, they're also dominating the Africans and their tribes. And they're also dominating their rights. Janessa.
So like, what we think is that even though like our focus on imperialism and like the book was meant to like show that Kurtz was a savage throughout because of like human nature and stuff, but like you really gotta like think like why did the author have to choose like Africa of all places to like show imperialism? Like of all the other like countries that he like chose for this book, why did he choose Africa? So especially from like people from Britain, like they had like colonized, imperialized the world, and why did they choose like Africa for this particular like set display of imperialism? Like
They could have taken Asia, for instance, like China, Japan, but no, Africa.
And like it's another thing that even though this is a work of fiction, it's still like derogatory and like racist to even dehumanize like Africans even at this like time of state. Like sure, Conrad at his time was like pretty back then, pretty like far back then, but it still doesn't excuse that what as of right now it's racist through our times, but it doesn't excuse that it's not like
Just
it can't be
because it's
racist back
older.
then.
Yeah. Almost 4 minutes.
Let's see. Also, like
The title itself, Heart of Darkness, like Heart of Darkness. Darkness, like it says it all. Don't laugh. It says it all in the title. The darkness refers to as the Africans' customs and their rights being taken, and how it dehumanizes themselves.
and even it, like throughout the book, it even exploits Africans throughout the story. Like Africans throughout the story aren't like really being treated like as humans. They're being
Dogs.
seen as savage servants, like just like another like creatures from another world. And like when Kurtz like becomes one of those savages, like it's just really racist because it just really dehumanizes like Africans, because it's just like, oh, he has become like a savage through himself or with them. Like there could have been many other ways to like present like, oh, like Kurtz had been taken, or like had like because of human nature he had become a savage. Like why is it that Conrad had to like decipher this through African traits and like dehumanizing them. Like there could have been other methods to like show that you could lose yourself like through like various like forces. Let's see. Also, what was it?
And how Conrad interprets the Africans as worshipping satanic rituals just because they were doing rituals with Kurds, and so he interpreted them as like being like Lucifer and stuff. And yeah, that's all.
Okay.
All right, so basically, Conrad's time era was a time era of racism. So it wasn't that he himself was racist. It was just that in his era, it was a common knowledge that racism would sometimes leak within their words. But all he was trying to show was how imperialism was taking over the world, including how the Europeans were trying to take over Africa through the use of imperialism. And it was unfortunate that some racism did go in it, but it did not mean that he was racist himself, trying to make others sound racist as well.
Yeah, because even in the book, Marla even says that all of Euros contributed to the making of Kurds. And he declared that the conquest of Earth, which mostly means taking it away from those who have different complexions or slightly flatter noses than themselves, is not a pretty thing. He pretty much never thought that the Africans weren't even savages to begin with. He was just trying to show how demographically, how ugly the imperialism could even get in the first place. That's why he quoted that. So even Marlowe realized that it wasn't that they were savages, it was just the horrors of what imperialization did to them. They caused them to pretty much go against everything. Okay.
And there's also how when Marlowe, at the end of the story, he realizes that it's not just in Africa that imperialism is lurking, but everyone else. He realizes that it's lurking in the streets of Brussels and hovering over the Thames, which the Thames River was considered the river opposite of Congo, which was savage and harsh, while the Thames was a normal river to live through, calm, peaceful. But he figures it out that in the end, well, he realizes it, that imperialism is still lurking there, even though it is through a different type of topic. And he also realizes that indeed it is a cosmic, as shown in a sentence in the manuscript. The earth suddenly seemed shrunk to the size of a pea spinning in the heart of immense darkness. The immense darkness, on the other hand, isn't racism. It is imperialism that is being showed through the rivers.
Yeah, so even the title, The Heart of Darkness, I don't think it's just about the African Americans themselves. It's the darkness within us that causes us to want more. So it's the darkness within the Europeans wanting to create everything so that they're civilized, despite the fact that others may not want it. It's just the greed and our own darkness that causes that.
And they don't just describe the African Americans as barbarian or savage. They also describe them as superb, magnificent, or stately, which is how they describe Kurt's mistress in the book, which is not showing any racism at all. It's showing the true form of an African American.
Also, in the passages, Marl also recognized that it wasn't that the Africans were savages. It's just that the Europeans struggled to actually recognize the humanity of Africans because they just saw them as people who weren't part of it, and that they just didn't know who that they were. Doesn't mean that they were themselves were savages. It's just that they didn't know who they were. Okay.
To rebuttal them, they only mentioned, since they were mentioning Kurt's mistress, they clearly stated that Kurt's mistress was superb, magnificent, and stately. But they forgot to mention that she was a savage and superb, wild-eyed, and magnificent, meaning that Kurt still viewed her as a savage, meaning that it's still racist, because even though she's Kurt's lover, Kurt still saw her as not as an African, as like as a sex slave, but also as a savage.
Yeah, and another thing that could be brought up is that like Marlo is like, or the way that they describe like Carlos' mistresses is that it could in a way be turned as like fetishizing her. Like she's like when that quote, she was savage and superb, like in a sense that he could just be like really pay attention to her features and all, but not necessarily her as a human. And yeah.
Also, they mentioned that she is in first place and so can win Conrad's special brand of approval. And second, she fulfills a structural requirement of the story. A savage, counterpart to be refined European woman who will step forward to the end of the story. Meaning that not only she used as a mistress, but also as a sexual desire for Kurt, since Kurt is away from his home, and knowing the story that Kurt also has a fiance back home that's waiting for him, but the fact that he's desiring this savage woman is kind of like also racist.
Also, I'd also like to brought apart like when they talked about imperialism, like sure the book like showcases it, but imperialism also shows like the exploitation and colonization of other people, which in turn can like really like in some ways that colonizing and dehumanizing them would just like really in turn like make the colonizers like be like racist towards them. Yeah.
Alright, so the lovers part that was said in the racist is that not only are African women also used as lovers, but so are European women. It's a commonly known fact.
Indeed it is. And also, when she kept saying savage, it wasn't just that. She emphasized the savage part, but she just ignored every single else that he thought of her. Because he also saw her as this magnificent woman, and not just because she was just someone savage according to her, but just because she was from a different country, she was different, but he saw the good in her, and she saw that just because she's from a different country and they don't know much about it doesn't mean he can't see the beauty inside of her and everything.
And here's a quote that Hawkins gives on how Marlowe takes towards the recognition that the ones that are overlooked by Achebe, and that's where he turns the tables. So he imagines that Englishmen would soon clear out the road between Deal and Gravesend if African colonizers started catching them to carry heavy loads. And he realizes that if Africa's drums may have a profound meaning as the sound of bells in a Christian country, elsewhere drums represent savagery, and Marlowe's excited response tells him he's kin to Africans because he also contains primal urges. But in this passage, he sees they are kin to him because they are also have reverence. And this basically shows that Africans and Europeans aren't that different apart from one another. It just shows that in one place that, to one meaning, the Europeans think that the Africans' drums are savage, while they can be the same as the Christian bells that are heard in the European country.
Heart of Darkness is a racist book that is written by a racist author. And also because the setting is in Africa, and since the setting is in Africa, they don't really talk about Africa. They only use it as a background prop for their racist remarks.
Like it eliminates the African as a human factor. What was it? It really doesn't highlight like how like any accomplishments or any of the things that African do.
Europeans.
And Conrad himself was racist, so he had put his own views throughout this book, and it really showed just like how he thought about African people. And another thing is that imperialism, sure, this book was trying to showcase that imperialism is bad, but however, it also showed that in some ways, like imperialism, if you get too greedy, the colonizers in turn will most likely be prejudiced and discriminate those they are trying to colonize. Like usually imperialism, that one quote was white man is the superior race, and in turn, like the colonizers think like, oh, we are the superior ones. Everyone else that is not white and fair skinned are below us. And as shown in
this map or globe, do you see this part? Is black. Do you see Europe? There's no black. You know why? Because Europe's racist.
And yeah,
That's all. Bitch made it up.
So, in revision on that Conrad's Heart of Darkness is not racist, it's because he was just trying to show imperialism throughout his story, and during that time there was some racism, but that did not mean that Conrad himself was racist. It's just the way he worded things was from the racist time era, but he did not mean for it to sound racist at all.
And just because he actually said those things, it also meant that he didn't really know much about them, because throughout the book he never really refers to them by names or anything, because he didn't know where they're actually, who and what they were actually are. So he would just refer to what pretty much everyone else said about them.
And what he was trying to do is compare how Europeans' imperialism was going to affect Africa, and show how imperialism works throughout Africa, but in fact it was turning the Europeans back to being savages like they normally used to be back then.
So just because the so just because they thought that you guys were different in the first place doesn't mean they were already similar to begin with, because we all come from savagery in the first place. So
he was just showing how everyone was referring back to their own time period, how they all would go back to being their own savage ways, and that in truth they themselves fall into it, not that another race influences them into falling into it. They themselves accepted it and they will fall back into savagery.
and the amount of damage that the imperialists actually do, wouldn't that make them savages themselves?